Welcome to the Briefing PM, your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News, I should say, on TV and on radio. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and here's what's coming up over the next hour. The end of free lateral flow tests could be coming soon, with the government said to be drafting plans so that we can learn to live with COVID. We'll be debating that. We'll speak to someone at the heart of the campaign to end cladding about what the government plans to do next. And we'll be in Parliament, where the Secretary of State for Housing and Levelling Up, Michael Gove, is due to address MPs. That and so much more. As always, do get in touch. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Good afternoon on this Monday. But first, at 3, here's the news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. Let's get you up to date here on GB News. Novak Djokovic says he's pleased and grateful after the judge overturned his visa cancellation. The player said he aims to compete in the Australian Open. Earlier today, a court ruled he did have the required medical exemption to enter the country without a COVID vaccine. Australia's immigration minister, though, says he reserves the right to exercise personal power to expel the star from the country. Darren Djokovic is the tennis star's uncle. Speaking to GB News, he said his nephew's been treated like an animal.
I don't know what's wrong with the people there, you know. If Novak is not welcoming, they're supposed to say that. Please don't come. And if they issue the visa for him, and after that they arrest him, this is like, for me, it looks like a trap for the animals, you know, like a wolf, animals in the mountain, you know, and they invite him to come and they trap him and put him in the jail, trying to put him on his knees.
Number 10 say Boris Johnson will not face an investigation into the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat. Labour had called for an inquiry after it emerged that the Prime Minister had discussed a pet project by Lord Brownlow for a Great Exhibition 2.0 in a WhatsApp message. But the PM's official spokesman said it's been confirmed that the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards wouldn't be looking any further into the matter. Well, the government's considering cutting the COVID isolation period for fully vaccinated people in England from the current minimum of 7 days to 5. Speaking during a visit to a vaccination centre in his West London constituency, Boris Johnson says that they're following the science and that lateral flow tests will continue to be freely available.
I think that we'll use them as long as they're very important, and there's a similar argument to be had about the quarantine period, whether to come down from 7 days to 5 days. We're looking at that, and we'll act according to the science.
Pregnant women are being urged to get vaccinated against COVID-19 to protect their babies. The Department for Health and Social Care say nearly all of pregnant women, 96% of them who were hospitalised with COVID symptoms between May and October last year, hadn't taken the vaccine. The government says the jabs are safe during pregnancy and have no impact on fertility. Now, 8 men who lost a High Court case against Manchester City Football Club in a battle against a former youth coach have said they'll appeal. The former players claim that the convicted paedophile Barry Bennell abused them while they were playing for teams that he coached between 1979 and 85. Now, they say Manchester City were vicariously liable for the harm they suffered. But a judge ruled against them, saying the connection was insufficient and that legal action was brought too late. A lawyer representing the men say they will appeal. Firms responsible for dangerous cladding could be hit by a developer's tax if they don't voluntarily step up to fix safety defects. That's according to the government. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, says developers will need to start contributing to the full outstanding cost this year, which is estimated to be around £4 billion. Sir Keir Starmer believes it's a move in the right direction, but plans are still too vague.
Anything that helps the people who are in this awful position in relation to cladding is welcome. It's very late. It's 4 years or more since the Grenfell disaster. And there have been many, many broken promises along the way. And so anything now that moves this forward is welcome. Of course it is. I would prefer there was a plan rather than just a promise, because the terms of what's going to happen are still very vague.
The last 7 years were the hottest on record by a clear margin. That's the analysis of EU scientists. It's the Copernicus Climate Change Service, and they say Europe experienced its hottest summer ever last year. The soaring temperatures caused intense wildfires in Turkey and Greece, with the highest temperature recorded in Sicily at 48.8 degrees. Buckingham Palace has unveiled the lineup of celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. It will mark her 70 years on the throne, with a 4-day UK bank holiday weekend from the 2nd to the 5th of June. A platinum pudding competition that will be judged by a panel including Dame Mary Berry is among some of the events being planned, with street parties and a concert. It is 6 minutes past 3. You are up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you at past. Right now, back to the briefing with Darren.
Yeah, very good afternoon and welcome to the briefing on this Monday, the start of a new political week. I'm Darren McCaffrey. Now, we're expecting an important statement in the Commons shortly from the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary, Michael Gove. He'll be threatening building firms with changes to the law unless they pay for the removal of unsafe cladding from low-rise buildings. We'll bring that live to you. We're expecting it around at 3:30. But before that, let's start with the top story today. And Boris Johnson is set to axe free lateral flow tests amid concerns over the cost, according to reports over the weekend. Under new proposals, free tests will be limited to high-risk settings such as care homes, hospitals and schools. Now, the rumoured introduction of fees for lateral flow tests has received heavy criticism from other political parties. Labour's Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting hit out against the plans, stating that it would be the wrong decision at the wrong time. Testing is absolutely crucial for keeping infections under control, he argued. But the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has stated he does not recognise the reports of free lateral flow tests being slashed yet, while the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, tweeted that it's hard to imagine much that would be less helpful to trying to live with COVID than getting rid of those tests. Well, earlier today, the Prime Minister spoke at a Boots pharmacy in his constituency in West London, urging people, again, to get the booster jab.
We're going to have to make sure that we continue to use testing as one of our most important lines of defence for as long as it's necessary. The other important line of defence, in addition to testing, is, of course, getting vaccinated. Fantastic to be here. Boots, looking at people queuing to get vaccinated. Just talk to somebody who was getting vaccinated for the first time. That's really important. Still people coming forward for the first time to get vaccinated. The boosters are going well. We've now done 36 million boosters, 90% of people over 50. But clearly there's an opportunity for people who have not been boosted to come and use those slots. It can make a huge difference. NHS still under a lot of pressure. 18,000 people in beds, COVID patients in the NHS. Absolutely vital that we look after our health and look after the NHS and get boosted. I think that we'll use them as long as they're very important. And there's a similar argument to be had about the quarantine period, whether to come down from 7 days to 5 days. The thing to do is to look at the science. Yes, of course.
About reducing that isolation period.
We're looking at that, and we will we'll act according to the science as we always have. But what I would say to everybody is that Omicron is still out there. It's incredibly contagious. Everybody will know somebody who has had it. It can be pretty unpleasant. Sadly, as you know, 90% of the people who are in ICU with COVID have not been vaccinated, and it's absolutely crucial that everybody gets their booster. It can make a huge difference. We've got to make sure that we see off Omicron. We're making great progress. The number of people who have been boosted, as I say, is 36 million. 90% of over 50s have been done, but there are still millions who need to do it. Loads of people who've had 2 jabs but haven't yet come forward for their boost. And I say to everybody, join the movement, build it. Everybody's coming forward to it. I've just seen the queues this morning. There's still a lot of enthusiasm to get boosted, and I hope everybody does it.
There you go, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking in Uxbridge, his constituency in West London, a little earlier on today. Will join us now on the programme. It's the political commentator Jason Reid. Jason, very good afternoon to you. First of all, let's start with this issue of lateral flow tests. The government seemed to be putting a kind of wet blanket on this over the weekend, suggesting it wasn't immediately going to happen, but there does seem to be a change in tone, I think, from ministers in recent days, that things like free testing potentially coming to an end is now on the horizon.
Well, you're absolutely right that they were keen over the weekend to make clear that this is not part of their immediate plans. The Cabinet Minister Nadhim Zahawi was asked about it multiple times and was very eager to stress that the government is not planning to do this in the foreseeable future, to remove the right to order free lateral flow tests. But you're right that there does seem to be a change in the government's thinking. It was interesting this morning that the Prime Minister's spokesperson repeatedly referred to the COVID epidemic rather than the pandemic, implying that they, as Boris Johnson has said on multiple occasions, they do believe that we are coming out of the other end of this now that the Omicron variant has, there are some reports that the peak has passed in places like London, that we are approaching the end of the pandemic, and so we don't need to be having the same measures in place that we've always had. And scrapping free tests seems, in the government's view, to be a good place to start that when we do reach that point. Free testing has already cost a total of about £6 billion since the start of the pandemic, so I'm sure the Treasury is very keen indeed to save a little bit more money whenever it can. And of course, as you said, there's been a lot of opposition to this idea, at least for the moment. The Labour Party, Nicola Sturgeon, have come out against it. The CBI as well, from a business point of view, have tried to appeal to Boris's desire to keep the country open and have stressed that free testing is a very important part of that for the foreseeable future, allowing people to continue to go to work and to continue to live their lives in the normal way.
In saying that, how much political pressure is there from inside the Conservative Party, from its own backbenchers, to look to move to live with COVID, if you like, suggestions that many Conservative MPs now want restrictions lifted, Plan B lifted in England, when they're due to be reviewed at the end of this month?
Absolutely right. Yeah, in December there was that vote on Plan B in Parliament in which over 100 Conservative MPs rebelled. They voted against the government. That's the biggest revolt that we've seen since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. They were very upset indeed about the Plan B restrictions. And there's a lot of discontent on the Conservative backbenches because they are very, very keen for us to move on from the pandemic, to lift all restrictions and to learn to live with COVID. In particular, Mark Harper, who is the chairman of the COVID Recovery Group, a lockdown skeptic group on the Tory backbenches, he's laid down the gauntlet that he wants the government to be scrapping all COVID restrictions completely by the end of this month, by the end of January. And he believes that many of the members of his group and many other Tory MPs would be very, very unhappy and start to vote against the government more often if restrictions stretched out longer beyond that. So the Prime Minister is in a difficult position trying to balance the perceived need for free testing and the discontent within his own party at the ongoing restrictions and the ongoing spending around COVID.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, that scientists over the weekend seem to be suggesting that the Prime Minister's, what critics would call gamble on all of this, potentially is now going to pay off, that we are starting to see adjacent infections fall, particularly in the capital, probably in other parts of the country as well. Hospitalisations not likely to reach the peak that the worst case scenarios were suggesting. But all in all, the news narrative seems to have moved on from that. The Prime Minister doesn't seem to be getting much credit for it when you look at the front pages of the papers. Interesting, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Sun today going quite heavily on this cost of living crisis. The narrative now seems to be from the Conservative press and indeed from Conservative MPs that the Prime Minister needs to do something about rising energy prices and rising tax bills expected in April.
Boris Johnson did get some credit, perhaps prematurely, before Christmas, when he was portrayed on a lot of the front pages as being the white knight who's come in to save our Christmas, when there was a lot of speculation that we might have restrictions over Christmas and have a repeat of 2020 when we were in, a lot of the country was in tier 4 restrictions, and so we weren't able to enjoy Christmas in the normal way. But you're right that the news cycle certainly has moved on this month, at least since New Year's, which from a public health point of view seems to be a good thing, that, as you say, The infections and the hospitalizations and deaths certainly have not reached the levels that some of the worst case scenario predictions were forecasting earlier this month and last month when the Omicron variant was first taking hold. And so other issues like energy bills and like the cost of living crisis are coming to the fore. And of course, they are connected. One of the main concerns about this proposal to roll back the free lateral flow testing is the effect it will have on people's cost of living, that people will have to, in a lot of cases, fork out and pay for lateral flow tests because they need them for their work or for various other reasons. And so that will hit the poor hardest because it's going to cost money now to get tested, even when we still have COVID around and lots of businesses and lots of other organizations are requiring testing. And so that's one of the arguments against this idea of rolling back the free testing.
OK, Jason, appreciate your time. That is Jason Reid, our political commentator, joining us, focusing on the politics at the start of this new political week. Well, let's move to Wales now, because the First Minister there, Mark Drakeford, has accused England of being a global outlier in its more relaxed COVID restrictions and said that Boris Johnson is politically paralysed. Mr Drakeford was asked at Friday's Welsh Government COVID press conference about criticisms from Conservative MPs that Wales's COVID rules are damaging, ludicrous and political posturing. Mr Drakeford said that Boris Johnson's government was failing to protect people in England. He said that the one country that stands out as not taking action to protect its population is England. Well, this all comes as a row has erupted between the small football club of Chester FC and the Welsh Government. The club is registered in England. However, the Welsh border runs through the ground, meaning the pitch and stands are technically in Wales. This has led to the Welsh Government arguing the club should be subject to restrictions in place in Wales, which means essentially fans not attending football grounds. Well, join me to discuss all of this is the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davis. Andrew, very good afternoon to you. Let's first of all start with this division that we see between the Welsh Labour government and the Conservative government in Westminster. What did you make of Mark Drakeford's comments, which in some ways are factually correct, that England is somewhat of an outlier when you look at most of the rest of Western Europe?
Well, it's a bit rich coming from a Labour First Minister who is refusing to have an independent public inquiry into his government's actions here in Wales that has led to the highest death rate of any part of the United Kingdom. That's the record that Mark Drakeford is standing on. It is a fact that there are challenges across the United Kingdom wherever you look when it comes to COVID and the different variants that we've seen. But the First Minister here in Wales will not stand the test of a public inquiry and has refused to order his backbenchers and his government to vote for one every time we've put a debate forward in the Senedd here in Wales 3 times now.
Just in terms of that differentiation, we know rates are very high in Wales at the moment, though that may be because there's a slight delay, of course, relative to what's happening in England. But on the whole, that cautious approach, supporters of that cautious approach were saying, well, that was a sensible move given the lack of data at that time when these restrictions were introduced. That in the end, Boris Johnson took a gamble. It may well have paid off, but it was a gamble.
Well, there are challenges, as I said, across the United Kingdom, but what we have to look at is the wider challenges that are placed on society when you bring these type of restrictions in. The mental health implications, damage to the economy, jobs and prosperity, and then balance that with obviously the protections or the restrictions, because the government in Wales try and call them protections, we call them restrictions, because if you take someone's liberty away from them, that to me is a restriction on people's ability to make choices for themselves. And it is a fine balancing act. But we believe that the Welsh Government have overstretched themselves. You talked about Chester Football Club. There was an example over Christmas where Caerphilly Rugby were playing and there were 50 spectators on the touchline and there were 140 in the clubhouse because of the restrictions watching it on the TV. That number was allowed in the clubhouse, 140, but there's only 50 allowed to be in the fresh air and on the touchline. Park runs have been affected here in Wales. And so there's a whole host of anomalies within the regulations here in Wales that really should have been tidied up by now by the First Minister. And in particular, we should now be looking at a roadmap coming out of these restrictions because obviously we want to look beyond COVID now and start to learn to live with COVID.
And does that mean ending free testing in your book?
Well, I noticed the UK government ministers that were doing the Sunday political rounds yesterday were saying they don't recognise the story. And to me, the testing regime is an important part of the 3-pronged attack that we have in facing down the COVID crisis that we've all been through over the last 2.5 years or so. The first part is vaccination and booster. The next part is testing. And then the antivirals is the third part. So it's really important that those pieces of the jigsaw stay in one piece until we can generally say that society as a whole has started to learn to live with COVID and we move into better times.
If we can just move on for a second onto the cost of living crisis has been branded. We know energy bills are going up, potentially by as much as 50% in the next couple of months, putting enormous pressure on families' finances. We're expecting big tax rises in April with the change in income tax threshold and that national insurance hike. This is not sustainable for millions of people across the country, hundreds of thousands in Wales. The government in Westminster needs to do something, don't they? The Prime Minister needs to act.
Well, it is a fact that whatever country you're looking at across the globe is facing higher inflation. I think Germany's on about 6 or 7%. At the moment, the prediction is for this country to be on 7%. America's got high inflation as well. And so it's incumbent on governments, wherever they are, to respond to that cost of living pressure. What we've got to do is make sure we build the solid economy that creates quality jobs, that pays decent wages. And we know that coming out of the COVID pandemic, the policies, the economic policies pursued by the UK government have succeeded in doing that, in having record numbers of people in employment and ultimately creating vacancies that will soak up others who want to find new forms of employment to pay those type of bills. But when it comes to energy, these are pressure points that energy security needs to be put at the forefront of most people's thinking, which hasn't been there for some time.
But in many ways, Andrew, those are medium to long-term things about job creation and about changing our dependence on certain forms of energy. In the short term, literally in months' time, people are looking at hundreds, maybe thousands of extra pounds they're going to have to find for these tax rises and for higher energy costs. I mean, for example, removing VAT on energy would be one step that many within your own party want to see happen. Seems a pretty sensible move to try and relieve some of that pressure.
Well, as I said, I think it's incumbent on all governments to help their citizens out with cost of living pressures. And I hope that the Chancellor and other government ministers are putting their shoulder to the wheel to bring forward a suite of policies to do that. We saw part of those suite of policies coming forward in the autumn budget when the changes to universal credit were brought forward so that people could retain more of the cash that they earn if they do have a job and sit below a certain threshold. But it's measures helping those in society who can least afford these cost pressures that we've got to be looking at. As someone who campaigned for Brexit, I do find it ironic that other political parties that viciously campaigned against the vote for Brexit are now saying that we should use those new freedoms to take VAT off energy bills. I want to see a low-tax economy that delivers for the citizens of this country, but it needs to be a suite of measures that are brought forward by the Chancellor that are affordable and ultimately get those cost of living pressures off the backs of people wherever they live, whether it be Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland or England.
OK, Andrew, appreciate your time. That's the Conservative leader in Wales, Andrew Otti-Devis, joining us from Cardiff. OK, we're going to pause there on this Monday afternoon on GB News. Do get in touch, particularly if you've been affected by any of the cost of living crisis, or your views on COVID. The email address, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up in a couple of minutes, though, we're going to be live in Parliament, where Michael Gove is due to address the cladding crisis. We're expecting a government statement in the Commons in just a couple of minutes. That is all coming up after we bring you the weather at the start of the week.
Hello again. After a fairly dull day for many today, it should be a lot brighter tomorrow, certainly across the northern half of the UK. Another fairly grey and at times damp day to come tomorrow across the south. It's these weather fronts providing the rain, but they are slowly but surely drifting southwards, and as they clear away, we will see breaks in the cloud developing across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. But certainly pretty damp here through this evening. Outbreaks of rain and drizzle covering most of England and Wales. And at times through the night, some of that rain may just turn a little heavy, especially over the East Midlands up towards Lincolnshire. But as it clears from Scotland and Northern Ireland, we will just see maybe some pockets of frost, certainly in rural areas. But the south there, we're a long way from a frost, with temperatures holding up with all that cloud and rain and drizzle. A dank and misty, murky start to Tuesday then for most of England and Wales. But quite quickly, Northern England, North Wales turning brighter. A much brighter day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will still be showers across the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, and still pretty windy across the far north too. But elsewhere, the winds are light, and across the south, it should turn slowly drier, although the rain and drizzle lingering across East Anglia and the southeast till late on. Mild here, further north, temperatures closer to average. Quite quickly, though, temperatures will drop with the clear skies on Tuesday evening. Southern Scotland, northern England, and then later further south across England and Wales. And as well as turning frosty, there will be some patches of fog, which could be quite dense and could last for much of Wednesday. Generally, though, Wednesday's a dry and a bright day for the vast majority. Still quite cloudy across the northwest with some patchy rain. Still quite breezy here as well. But elsewhere, the winds are light. And for many, it'll be a bright winter's day with blue skies, plenty of sunshine. And temperatures after that frosty start close to average. Highest temperatures actually in the northwest. But if the fog sticks, that could really suppress the temperatures. And we're going to see more of that, I think, as the week goes on. Thicker, denser patches of fog, which will take much of the day to clear.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News home and security editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing on this Monday. The time is coming up to 3:30 p.m. You're watching and listening to GB News both on TV and on DAB radio. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, we are coming for you. That's the warning due to be issued to unsafe property developers by Michael Gove in the next couple of minutes. We're going to be live in the comments. That statement due to begin at just after 3:30 as he attempts to put pressure on developers to spend money on replacing dangerous cladding. This, of course, is the cladding crisis that we've been talking about. The Housing Secretary will lay out his plans in the next few minutes, which include tasking forensic accountants to track down those responsible and extending help to cover leaseholders of low-rise flats. Well, I think we can now be joined by the head campaigner at the Ends Our Campaign Cladding Scandal. His name is Paul Ashfar, and joined us. Paul, very good afternoon. to you. First of all, it's been heavily trailed what Michael Gove is going to say this afternoon. He seems to be taking a much tougher line against developers than his predecessor. What's your take on what we're expecting to hear from the governments?
Darren, I think on the face of it, it's good news, particularly for leaseholders like me. Previously, I would have had to stump up 100% of the cost of cladding, and with the announcement today, that could potentially change altogether. So it is good news. What I will say, though, is the devil's in the detail. We're not just facing a cladding crisis, we're facing a building safety crisis, meaning that there are many other fire safety issues and defects in buildings like mine, whether that's with cavity breaks to stop fire passing between flats or with fire detection systems. And today's funding, at least as far as we understand it, is only going to cover the external cladding. So it's a step in the right direction, but we still have a long way to go.
Indeed, and we are hoping to hear from the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, in just a couple of minutes, and hopefully we'll get some of that detail that you're talking about. From what I understand, though, this is only going to apply to buildings, I think, above 11 metres, which is better than the 18 that came before, but also no sign yet of when this money might be received by people who, frankly, desperately need it because they're already facing pretty high bills.
You're absolutely right. The really sad thing is that it's been 5 years since the Grenfell tragedy, and 5 long years where we've not really had any substantial action or steps forward. What I, as a leaseholder, would like to see is quick action. We need to turn tough talk into actual solutions for people who are trapped in the cladding crisis, like myself. I would hope that with all of the political will that Michael Gove has now generated from today, we will see that. Of course, what we want to see is developers pay, not leaseholders and not taxpayers. So I'm really hoping for a lot more faster progress than we've seen over the last couple of years.
And you were explaining there that this, at the moment, from what we understand, is the cladding on the outside of buildings, but there is concern about not enough fire restrictions inside buildings, like fire breaks and proper kind of fire installation, if you like, in the cavities of walls and so on.
That's exactly right. And these costs won't be covered by the funding announced today, at least as far as we understand. It's not just those costs as well. It's ongoing costs that in some cases have bankrupted many leaseholders. So these are skyrocketing insurance costs because of the danger that cladding poses. And of course, really exorbitantly expensive waking watch costs. This is for fire safety patrol, human fire safety patrols. Many people are forking out thousands of pounds a month, well in excess of what they have to pay in their mortgage, just to cover these costs. And they are truly crippling. So we also need to see progress on this as well.
And what's your personal experience of all of this, Paul? As you say, it's been ruinous, stressful, really quite dreadful for thousands and thousands of people up and down the country.
That's exactly right. For me, unfortunately, it's been well over a year of sleepless nights, worrying about whether the flat I saved so hard to buy was safe. And of course, worrying about the prospect of getting a bill for 10, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds landing on my doorstep. I was fortunate enough to get engaged recently, but we can't do anything about it because our life is on hold until this cladding crisis gets sorted out and we have financial security about my future. So really, a lot of hope rides on today's announcement.
OK, Paul, and I think you're going to hopefully stay with us because we are due to go over to the Commons to hear from Michael Gove in the next couple of minutes. But also, if you've been affected by any of this at home, we do want to hear your stories. And we know that this affects not just people in London, but up and down the country in towns and cities. Many who are unaware, of course, when they bought the property, that there would be a problem or that the fire regulations were not properly involved. Do get in touch with us at gbviews at gbnews.uk or indeed tweet us at GBNews. As I say, this is a story that does affect thousands of people and has cost many people already tens of thousands of pounds. Let's go over now to the Commons and hear from the Secretary of State, Michael Gove.
Secretary of State Gove.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to update the House on building safety. But before I do so, I can confirm that I have asked the Permanent Secretary at my department to conduct a leak inquiry. It was a matter of statement that I'm about to give were shared with the media before they were shared with members of this House and indeed those most affected. It's worth pausing at the start of any statement to reflect on why building safety is an issue of concern to all of us in this House today. It took the tragedy at Grenfell Tower on 14th of June 2017, as a result of which 72 innocent men, women and children lost their lives, to put building safety properly on the political agenda. Families were living in a building that was literally a death trap because of failures of enforcement and compliance in our building safety regime. And this government must take its share of responsibility for those failures. And over 4 years on from that terrible tragedy, it is clear that the building safety system remains broken. The problems that we have to fix have been identified by many across this House from all parties. And I'd like at this point also to register my appreciation of the work that the late Jack Dromey did on this issue. He was Shadow Housing Minister for 3 years, and both as a trade unionist and as Member of Parliament for Birmingham Erdington, he did a great deal to bring to light the plight of those who were affected by this crisis. As we know, there are still a small number of high-rise buildings with dangerous and unsafe cladding which have to be fixed. Secondly, we know that those who manufactured dangerous products and developed dangerous buildings have faced inadequate accountability so far and shown insufficient contrition. We also need to ensure that we take a proportionate approach in building assessments overall. There are too many buildings today which are declared unsafe, and there are too many who've been seeking to profit from that current crisis. And fourth and most importantly, leaseholders are shouldering a desperately unfair burden. They're blameless, and it is morally wrong that they should be the ones asked to pay the price. I'm clear about who should pay the price for remedying failures. It should be the industries who profited as they caused the problem and those who continue to profit as they make it worse. And Mr. Speaker, we'll take action on all of these fronts. To ensure that every remaining high-rise dangerous building has the necessary cladding remediation to make it safe, we will open up the next phase of the Building Safety Fund early this year and focus relentlessly on making sure it is risk-driven and delivered more quickly. We will also ensure that those who profited and continue to profit from the sale of unsafe buildings and construction products must take full responsibility for their actions and pay to put things right. Those who knowingly put lives at risk should be held to account for their crimes. And those who are seeking to profit from the crisis by making it worse should be stopped from doing so. Today, I'm putting them on notice. To those who missold dangerous products like cladding or insulation, to those who cut corners to save cash as they developed or refurbished people's homes, and to those who sought to profiteer from the consequences of the Grenfell tragedy, we are coming for you. I have established a dedicated team in my department to expose and pursue those responsible. We'll begin by reviewing government schemes and programmes to make sure that in accordance with due process, there are commercial consequences for any company which is responsible for this crisis and refusing to help to fix it. In line with this, just before Christmas, I instructed Homes England to suspend Ryden Homes, which is closely connected to the company that refurbished the Grenfell Tower, from its participation in the Help to Buy scheme with immediate effect. And I also want to welcome the decision by the Mercedes Formula One team and Toto Wolff to discontinue sponsorship from Kingspan, the cladding firm, with immediate effect. The voices of the families of the bereaved and the survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire were heard, but this is only the start of the action that must be taken. And Mr. Speaker, we must also restore common sense to the assessment of building safety overall. The government's clear. We've got to find ways for there to be fewer unnecessary surveys. Medium-rise buildings are safe unless there's clear evidence to the contrary. There must be far greater use of sensible mitigations like sprinklers and fire alarms in place of unnecessary and costly remediation work. So to achieve that, I'm withdrawing the government's consolidated advice note today. It's been wrongly interpreted, and it's driven a cautious approach to building safety in buildings that are safe that goes beyond what we consider necessary. And we're supporting new proportionate guidance for assessors developed by the British Standards Institution, which will be published this week. Second, we will press ahead with the Building Safety Fund, adapting it so that it is consistent with our proportionate approach. And we will set a higher expectation now that developers must fix their own buildings. and will give leaseholders more information at every stage of the process. And thirdly, before Easter, we'll be implementing our scheme to indemnify building assessors conducting external wall assessments, giving them the confidence to exercise their balanced professional judgment. And we will audit those assessments to make sure that expensive remediation is only being advised where it is necessary to remove a threat to life. I'll be working closely with lenders over the coming months to improve market confidence, and I've asked my colleague Lord Greenhalgh to work with insurers on new industry-led approaches that bring down the premiums facing leaseholders. Further, we'll take the power to review the governance of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors to make sure that they are equipped properly to support a solution to this challenge. Those in the industry who refuse to work with us in good faith to take a more proportionate approach should be clear about our determination to fix the problem for all those caught up in this crisis. Finally, we must relieve the burden which has been unfairly placed on leaseholders. And I want to pay tribute to all those across the House who've campaigned so passionately on this subject. They know the injustice of asking leaseholders, very often young people who have saved hard and made sacrifices to get their first steps on the housing ladder, to pay money they don't have to fix a problem they didn't cause, all while the firms that made a profit on those developments sit on their hands. So we'll take action to end this scandal and protect leaseholders. We will scrap the proposal for loans and long-term debt for medium-rise leaseholders. I can confirm today to the House that no leaseholder living in a building above 11 metres will ever face any costs for fixing dangerous cladding. And, working with members of both Houses, we will pursue statutory protection for leaseholders, and nothing will be off the table. As part of this, we'll introduce immediate amendments to the Building Safety Bill to extend the right of leaseholders to challenge those who cause defects in premises up to 30 years retrospectively. And we will also take further action immediately. We'll provide an additional £27 million to fund more fire alarms so we can end the dreadful misuse of waking watches. We will change grant funding guidance so that shared owners affected by this crisis can more easily sublet their properties and encourage lenders and landlords to approve subletting arrangements. And in the period before long-term arrangements are put in place, I will work with colleagues across government to make sure leaseholders are protected from forfeiture and eviction because of historic costs. Innocent leaseholders must not shoulder the burden. We've already committed £5.1 billion of taxpayers' funding from this government, but we should not now look to the taxpayer for more funding. We should not ask hard-working taxpayers to pay more taxes to get developers and cladding companies making vast profits off the hook. We'll make industry pay to fix all of the remaining problems and to help to cover the range of costs facing leaseholders. Those who manufactured combustible cladding and insulation, many of whom have made vast profits even at the height of the pandemic, they must pay now instead of leaseholders. We've made a start through the residential property developer tax and the building safety levy, both announced last February, but we'll now go further. I will today be writing to developers to convene a meeting over the next few weeks, and I'll report back to the House before Easter. We will give them the chance to do the right thing. I hope that they will take it, but I can confirm to the House today that if they do not, then if necessary, we will impose a solution upon them in law. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we must never be in this position again. So we're putting the recommendations of the Hackett Review on building safety in law, and we will shortly commence the Fire Safety Act. We're also today publishing new collaborative procurement guidance on removing the incentives for industry to cut corners and to help stop the prioritisation of cost over value. And we will legislate to deliver broader reforms to the leasehold system as well. We will also bring forward measures to fulfil commitments made in the Social Housing White Paper, so that when parliamentary time allows, we will have legislation on social housing regulation so social housing tenants cannot be ignored as those in the Grenfell community were for many years. 4.5 years on from the tragedy of Grenfell, it is long past time that we fix this crisis. And through the measures that I've set out today, we will seek redress for past wrongs and secure funds from developers, from construction product manufacturers, and we will protect leaseholders today and fix the system for the future. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call Shadow Secretary of State Lisa Nandy.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank you for your kind words about Jack Dromey, who should have been with us here today. There is a space over there that I know Jack would have occupied. Back in the 70s, horrified by the spectacle of a skyscraper in London that lay empty while people slept rough underneath it, Jack was one of those who occupied Centrepoint Tower in protest. He was never afraid to speak truth to power, and I hope that today marks the start of all of us across the House invoking his spirit. Because 4.5 years after the appalling tragedy at Grenfell and a road paved with broken promises and false dawns, hundreds of thousands are still trapped in unsafe homes, millions are caught in the wider crisis, and the families of 72 people who lost their lives are waiting for justice. So it's a relief that we finally have a consensus that the developers and manufacturers who profited from this appalling scandal, not the victims, should bear greater costs, and that blameless leaseholders must not pay. After a year of hell of the prospect hanging over leaseholders, we welcome the decision to remove the threat of forced loans. But can the Secretary of State tell us what makes him think that he can force developers who for 4 years have refused to do the right thing to pay up? We've been told there's a March deadline and a round table, but there isn't a plan. If he has one, can we hear it? Because he will find an open door on this side of the House if he has a credible proposal to bring. Today he warned developers that if negotiation fails, our backstop, what we can do, he said, is increase taxation on those responsible. But that isn't quite right, is it? I have here the letter from the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and can I remind him what it says? He was told you may use a high-level threat of tax or legal solutions in discussions with developers, but whether or not to impose or raise taxes remains a decision for me, the Chief Secretary, and is not a given at this point. The thing is, Mr. Speaker, if I've seen this letter, I'm fairly sure that the developers have too. And it appears, furthermore, that what he's told the public, that tax rises are the backstop, is not what he has told the Treasury. This letter says, you have confirmed separately that DL-UHC budgets are a backstop for funding these proposals in full, should sufficient funds not be raised from industry. Now, that is not what the Secretary of State told the House a moment ago. So can he clear this up? Has the Chancellor agreed to back a new tax measure if negotiations fail? Or is he prepared to see his own already allocated budgets, levelling up funding, or monies for social or affordable housing raided? Or is his plan to go back to the Treasury and renegotiate and legislate if he fails in March? And if that is the case, Mr. Speaker, it will take months. And there is nothing to stop freeholders from passing on the costs to leaseholders in the meantime. Has he even got an assessment of how many leaseholders will be hit with whacking great bills if he delays? So, Mr. Speaker, if he's serious about going after the developers, and I hope that he is, why isn't he putting these powers into the Building Safety Bill now? Because the only trick that he's got up his sleeve, as he just confirmed to the House, is to ban them from Help to Buy. And we know that the impact of that work, though welcome, will be marginal. Can he see the problem? He'll also know that there's a gaping hole in what he's proposed. A significant number of buildings have both cladding and non-cladding defects, and leaseholders in them face ruinous costs to fix things like missing fire breaks and defective compartmentation. Mr. Speaker, you cannot make a building half safe. Given that he recognises the injustice of all leaseholders caught up in the building safety crisis, why is he abandoning those who are hit with bills for non-cladding defects? And why will he not amend his bill so that all leaseholders are protected from historic defects in law? The truth is that the pace of remediation has been painfully slow. He is now on track to miss the deadline to fix all Grenfell-style cladding by over half a decade. And there are huge delays when it comes to Building Safety Fund applications. So will he get a grip on what is going on in his own department and ensure that the progress of remediation is accelerated markedly? Because for affected leaseholders, as he knows, this has been a living nightmare, and we owe it to them to bring it swiftly to an end. Mr. Speaker, what he's given us today is a welcome shift in tone and some new measures that we on this side of the House very much hope will succeed. But the harder I look at this, the less it stands up. We were promised justice and we were promised change to finally do right by the victims of this scandal. And that takes more than more promises. It takes a plan.
So stay.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Secretary of State for her questions. First of all, can I entirely agree with the generous and fitting words that she had for Jack Dromey, as I mentioned briefly in my...
There you go. That was the statement from the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, in the House of Commons. Lacey Nandy responding. Interesting, of course, both paying tribute there to Jack Dromey, Birmingham Labour MP, who very sadly died suddenly at the end of last week. Harriet Harman's husband had been a Labour MP for many years, since 2010. Before that, a trade union activist, someone widely regarded by MPs on all sides as a good politician and a decent man, and tributes being paid across the House of Commons to that very, very sad news at the end of last week. We're going to move on now, though, from the cladding crisis as well to a bit of international news, because the United States and Russia are beginning tough talks in Geneva today in what Washington hopes can avert the danger of a new Russian invasion of Ukraine without conceding to the Kremlin's far-reaching demands. Well, joining me now to explain what this all means, are we looking at the prospect of war in Ukraine? It's our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who's in the studio. Good afternoon to you, Mark. We know Joe Biden and President Putin have spoken on the phone quite a lot in recent weeks. Just explain what's at issue here. How realistic is it that Russia might be on the verge of invading Ukraine?
Well, it is really an important week, I think, in that you have, as you said, these talks underway. It's officials, diplomats that are taking control of the talks so far. It's in Geneva today, involving the US and Russia directly. By Wednesday, we will have talks, if things still last that long, between NATO and Russia, and then the European Union on Russia later in the week as well. Really, the concern is about the mounting tensions on the Ukrainian-Russian border. There are 100,000 troops and armour massed there. The Russians have said repeatedly that that is for exercises, but they've been there for some considerable time now. And the real fear that the West has is that what Russia is trying to do potentially is look at some form of an invasion.
And Russia's got these kind of slightly extraordinary demands, or at least it seems from this side, about kind of essentially saying countries like Ukraine should not be allowed to join NATO, that nuclear weapons should be removed from the continent of Europe, and that I think even some countries who have already joined NATO should essentially be kicked out.
Yeah, I mean, there's conflicting views as to what is at play here as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned. Some who believe that it is deliberately set far too high so that there is no way that those demands could be met, that gives him some kind of pretext then for military action. Others believe that what he is really doing, and I think this is probably nearer the truth, is aiming deliberately high in the hope of squeezing some concessions out of Western powers, Western alliances, who are willing to give way in some areas. But just how much they will give way, as you say, I mean, the issues around countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, who are already NATO members, suddenly being kicked out of NATO, well, that's not going to happen. The US has said that there may be some scope for reducing the number of military exercises that NATO takes part in on those eastern borders with Russia. Also, perhaps reducing the number of missiles that are there in Eastern Bloc countries as well.
And just for our TV viewers, we're looking at pictures there of the pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. Quite extraordinary. We've got this frozen conflict, essentially, where large parts of eastern Ukraine are being run by pro-Russian separatists. Obviously, Crimea has been annexed. But when we step back and think of it, 2022, we're looking at potentially a major conflict on the continent of Europe, of which Ukraine is not going to be a rollover either. We will see a lot of casualties on both sides.
It would be very messy indeed. Of course, 2014, when the conflicts erupted in Ukraine, we saw, as you say, the conflicts along much of eastern Ukraine, the separatists still involved in low-level conflict with the Ukrainian government, the annexation then of Crimea as well. But Ukraine has changed in terms of its military from what it was in 2014. There are now, we're told, 250,000 regular military personnel and another 900,000 conscripts, taking that total up to 1.1 and a bit million people if required. So as you say, there would be no rollover. But then look at Russia. You know, they've got more than 1 million people who are regular army and navy and air force personnel. So
I think
they're much more
capable. There's no doubt.
Capable. I think they put more money into their armed forces and the weapons systems. Everything is on a scale so much larger than Ukraine. Doesn't mean, of course, that the Ukrainian armed forces couldn't inflict some very heavy casualties on Russia. And I think one thing that this means, obviously, even if there was an invasion by Russia, if it was a full-scale invasion, it wouldn't be a quick war, which is what Putin would need to be popular in his homeland. It would be a messy affair.
Okay, Mark, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Mark White there with his analysis, our Home Affairs and Security Editor. Okay, just very quickly, lots of you getting in touch in regards to energy and the cost of living crisis. Pauline saying, why don't energy firms give discounts to people who live alone, like councils do? And Richard also saying, if we made domestic energy companies pull the finger out, we'd be quite a bit more productive and provide us with energy security. OK, that is it for today. I'm back again at 3 tomorrow. Up next, it's Colin Brazier with Brazier between 4 and 6. But first, let's go over to the weather with Alex Deacon. See you tomorrow.
Hello again. After a fairly dull day for many today, it should be a lot brighter tomorrow, certainly across the northern half of the UK. Another fairly grey and at times damp day to come tomorrow across the south. It's these weather fronts providing the rain, but they are slowly but surely drifting southwards, and as they clear away, we will see breaks in the cloud developing across Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. But certainly pretty damp here through this evening. Outbreaks of rain and drizzle covering most of England and Wales, and at times through the night, some of that rain may just turn a little heavy, especially over the East Midlands up towards Lincolnshire. But as it clears from Scotland and Northern Ireland, we will just see maybe some pockets of frost, certainly in rural areas. But the south, though, we're a long way from a frost, with temperatures holding up with all that cloud and rain and drizzle. A dank and misty, murky start to Tuesday then for most of England and Wales. But quite quickly, Northern England, North Wales turning brighter, a much brighter day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will still be showers across the Highlands, the Northern Isles and the Western Isles, and still pretty windy across the far north too. But elsewhere, the winds are light, and across the south, it should turn slowly drier, although the rain and drizzle lingering across East Anglia and the southeast till late on. Mild here, further north, temperatures closer to average. Quite quickly, though, temperatures will drop with the clear skies on Tuesday evening. Southern Scotland, northern England, and then later further south across England and Wales. And as well as turning frosty, there will be some patches of fog, which could be quite dense and could last for much of Wednesday. Generally, though, Wednesday's a dry and a bright day for the vast majority. Still quite cloudy across the northwest with some patchy rain, still quite breezy here as well. But elsewhere, the winds are light, and for many, it'll be a bright winter's day with blue skies, plenty of sunshine. And temperatures after that frosty start close to average. Highest temperatures actually in the northwest. But if the fog sticks, that could really suppress the temperatures. And we're going to see more of that, I think, as the week goes on. Thicker, denser patches of fog, which will take much of the day to clear.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hi there, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, we look at the daily COVID data published in the next few minutes. Does it confirm what many of the papers were saying today, that the Omicron crisis is now past its peak? Also, are you a builder or a blocker? The government says homeowners will retain the right to oppose new build in the planning system. And if only a fifth of Britons are on Twitter, should we really be covering the first anniversary of the launch of a rival platform?